My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber,
I'm Taimur, I'm a data scientist and writer,
and you're listening to Not Overthinking.
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Not Overthinking. This is very exciting. Taimur, how's it going? How are you doing today?
It's actually going great. I've had a really good week this week, actually. And there's been a couple of things this week that I've been really proud of because I've actually implemented the stuff that we were talking about on this podcast a few weeks ago. And there's actually...
So you paid someone 500 quid?
Not that particular thing, but I've implemented two of our episodes. The first was that I was invited to a friend's wedding, and the wedding's actually in Malawi. It's like next month in Malawi. And initially I was thinking, oh man, I don't know if I deserve a week off for no reason in July when I've just been traveling and so on. And so my initial thought was, no, I probably won't go. Tickets to Malawi are kind of pricey. I also don't want to take a week off. And then I thought, actually, no, this would be a great opportunity for a low optionality holiday with a bunch of random people who I don't know. I'll know my friend at the wedding, but I won't know any of the other people. And so I did it in the end. And so I'm going to Malawi for a week next month because of the low social optionality theory. So that was the first thing. And I was proud of taking that courageous step. The second thing was that in episode 5, where we talked about measure, you remember, we talked about how it's a no-brainer that people should invest in communication and how they talk and stuff. And so actually this week I went to a thing called Toastmasters. Do you know what Toastmasters is?
Yes, is that public speaking workshop thing that people in America recommend?
Yeah, so it's these sort of community organized public speaking kind of classes / workshops. There's basically little Toastmasters clubs all around the world. There's 16,000 in the world. There's 300 just in London. So a couple of friends and we went to one on Thursday in London, and it was really cool. There was maybe 15 or 20 people there. It's so well done. The organization was set up in the 1930s, so they've had 80 years to iterate on the format of this thing, and it is a well-oiled machine. It's unbelievable. Basically, the goal is to ease people into public speaking, and so they have this sort of very fixed agenda for the meeting. It was 2.5 hours. And they kind of give as many people sort of roles as possible. So if it's your first week there, then you'll sort of stand at the front and read the mission statement for 15 seconds or something. And then the next level is maybe you'll be the person keeping track of the minutes and announcing the time in between the speeches and stuff. And you'll sort of do these small roles and build up all the way to doing a 7 to 8 minute speech in front of everyone. And so they have this really nice progression where everyone gets involved, and it's just super supportive, really well done. It was actually extremely cool.
Wait, so were you keeping the minutes, or were you?
No. So we were just guests. We were just guests this week. But if we join as members and start going properly, then we'll kind of work our way up the gradient.
Okay, and then these final speeches, are these completely improv, or do you prepare how?
So in each meeting they have an improv bit where the Toastmaster will call up 3 people to give improv speeches on random topics that he says. So if you are a member who's been going for a few weeks and you're sort of at that level where you can do that, then you might get picked for that. And then every week there's also 3 prepared speeches on random topics by various people.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's really cool. I definitely want to chat about that more with you another time. But getting down to the meat of it, what are we going to talk about today?
All right. So here's something I've been thinking about recently. A lot of sort of thought threads that have been going on in my mind in the past few months have all led back to a single place, which is that I think fundamentally what we're looking for in most things that involve other people, so anything involving other people, we are fundamentally, I think, on this quest for authenticity, and we're looking for something real in other people. But here's the clincher. One thing I've realized, I keep, whenever I think about this, I keep thinking back to the fact that it's actually really hard to keep it real. Finding this sort of authenticity in our lives is really, really hard. And it's really special when we do find it. So this sounds super abstract, of course, but I think this links into lots of different things. So first of all, I'm a big fan of sort of kids. I like little kids. Sort of
You're a big fan of kids.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Yeah. Yeah, I really like little kids. And I think a big part of why lots of people find young kids endearing is that they keep it real. Like until probably the age of sort of 7 or 8, kids don't really have the social intelligence to not keep it real. Like they don't really have any choice but to just sort of be authentic. And so like when you're talking to a kid who's like less than 7 years old, say, it's really nice because there's no games going on. They're not doing any signaling or anything. It's just really nice because you're sort of speaking directly with their mind almost. There are of course a few things where even little kids start to play games. You know how like sometimes kids will fall over and then look around to see if anyone's watching, and if someone's watching, then they'll stop crying or something.
Classic plea for attention.
Yeah, so there's stuff like that. But I think for the most part, like until the age of about 7 or 8, kids aren't really aware of the social subtext that underlies everything that we do. And so I think kids are really endearing until that age because they keep it real. And then after that age, I think from like 7 to 14 or something, kids become really annoying. And they become really annoying because they start to get aware of the social subtext and they start to understand how to play signaling games. But from like the ages of 7 to 14, they're so bad at it that it's just really, really obvious. And so like, I don't know, I've had lots of interactions with sort of young, 8 to 14-year-olds where, I don't know, they're just trying to like brag all the time and they think they're being like really subtle about it, or just they start playing lots of signaling games. They're very bad at it, but they still think that's like a good thing to do. So I think, one thing that points to the value of authenticity is that I think because, kids are very endearing until the point where they stop being authentic. Now, another thing is, I think part of why we like things like comedy, and I think part of why it's so satisfying to make someone laugh, is because in that moment, they are being completely real. It's like an involuntary reaction, right? Like you can't really fake that. I mean, maybe you can fake laugh, but I think part of why we really enjoy making other people laugh, or even just like watching people laugh, is that it's like truly authentic. They can't really control their face when they're doing it. They can't really control what's going on. It's like it's a rare moment when you're truly sort of seeing someone in a real way. And I've so I think there's like, I think that it's surprisingly hard to find these moments, and that's why these moments feel really special. And I think a big part of charisma and like what draws us to other people and what draws other people to us, I think, is this idea of like keeping it real and being authentic. We sort of like it when people are being themselves, and we don't like it when people are being fake or whatever. But I was sort of looking back on a lot of the social interactions I've had, and I think there's actually alarmingly few of them in which I've actually been truly keeping it real.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So I've met a few sort of new people in the past month or whatever, and I think in a lot of these interactions, when I'm sort of meeting them, I think a lot of it is just sort of me responding to what they're saying in a particular way. Like I think for a while I don't really reveal anything or do anything or say anything that would sort of uniquely be something that I would do or say. It's more sort of responding appropriately to the things that they're saying, and like
so I suppose responding in a way that a reasonably polite person in our culture might respond to the specific thing that they say.
Yeah,
so nothing specifically unique to you.
Yeah,
or like if anyone were to take your position, they would probably be running the same script.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the kind of interactions I've had where I felt really good about them afterwards, and I think like where you sort of click or connect with someone, you have chemistry or whatever, I think those are the interactions where, for whatever reason, you can both just keep it real from the start. You can be like authentic with each other from the start.
Okay, hang on. Let's try and define this thing of authenticity, because you're saying a lot of seemingly obvious things. Because the thing about the thing about kids being authentic is like a pretty standard part of the whole. This is why kids are endearing because they keep it real. It's a sort of thing you'd read on like a life hacker article or something like that. So what do you mean by authentic?
Okay, I'll tell you what I don't mean by authentic. I don't mean that like you have to be exactly the same person in like in different contexts. I think that's sort of one thing that some people say where it's like, if it comes back to some of the stuff we've been talking about in previous weeks about like if you want to change yourself or get better at being funny or whatever, then it's like not being yourself. It's somehow like disingenuous. I'm not talking about anything like that. I think for me, the authenticity comes down to, I think it basically just comes down to signaling. I think it's fair to say you're probably most authentic with, say, your very closest friends or close family members. And I think what makes those relationships different to other ones is that there's actually no desire or need or pressure to signal anything. Like I don't need to signal stuff to you when I'm hanging out with my best mates. We don't need to signal stuff to each other. I think it comes down to signaling.
Okay. To what extent? So, like, when you were talking about authenticity, there was another phrase that was going through my mind, and that was vulnerability. To what extent do you think this authenticity is, or rather, what in your mind is the relationship between vulnerability and authenticity? Because I feel like that should become part of the equation in some way or another.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And usually when it comes to things like vulnerability, the subtext that it portrays is that in a way that you're being authentic, you're being your real self, you're showing your flaws rather than trying to cover them up, which is what you would be doing in standard polite conversation. And supposedly vulnerability is quite endearing to people.
But it feels very linked to the signaling thing, because trying to like cover up your vulnerabilities, you do that because you want to signal certain things, that like, I'm strong or powerful or whatever, right? That's the reason why you want to sort of cover up the vulnerabilities. I feel like signaling is pain. I get what you're saying about vulnerability, but like
it's just a kind of a subset of signaling.
It's sort of a result of not wanting to signal.
Okay, and then if we were to define signaling in a way that doesn't assume people know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. Give me a sec.
So my idea of signaling is having an ulterior motive almost, and wanting others to see you in a particular light, which partly motivates the things that you say and the things that you do.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much in line with how I think about it. It goes back to like the friends and family thing. Like when you're hanging out with people you know really, really well, you don't, no particular thing you say or do is really going to change their image of you. And like, you don't really care about changing their image of you. You don't care about impressing them and so on. And so that's sort of the basic definition by which I'm playing to, I think.
Okay, right. So we've talked a little bit about this new theory of yours, that the only thing really that people really want in their interactions with others is some semblance of authenticity. So what's if we assume that this is true, where does it take us next?
Okay, so I think there are. Okay, yeah. So the thing that started me thinking about all of this was a few weeks ago. I had some like meeting with some investor, and I was a bit anxious like going into the meeting, and I was thinking about like, why am I anxious? Why am I like feeling this way about this meeting? And I think what it basically came down to was the fact that I felt like there was a way of behaving that I was supposed to do. Like I felt like there was some way that these kinds of meetings are supposed to be, and I wasn't sure what that was, and so I was anxious about like fitting that supposed to. And then that got me thinking that like actually pretty much all the situations in which I've ever been sort of anxious about something have been because there's this sort of invisible supposed to of how something's meant to go or how you're meant to behave or act that like I don't quite know, and so I feel anxious about like fitting that correctly. And so and then I thought that actually, if I could somehow like just force myself to keep it real in all these like interactions or in all these sort of different parts of my life, then there's actually nothing to worry about. Like there's nothing to be anxious about. If you're just playing by keeping it real rather than trying to fit the requirements of this supposed to-ness, then there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that reminds me of, for example, I don't know when it was it episode 2 when we discussed about networking events?
Yeah.
That was a social optionality episode about why a lot of people say that they don't like parties. And I suspect a big part of that is because you have an image in your head of what, a party should be like and how you should feel and how you should be interacting at a party. And I suspect actually the majority of people in the world would sympathize with the statement of, I feel anxious going to parties with people that I don't know, because there's this image of we should be behaving a certain way, we should be feeling a certain way. And so when we perceive ourselves as being the only ones that are a little bit uncomfortable, kind of on the sidelines of a group, despite, that everyone else probably has that experience as well, we treat that as a sense of anxiety. And I remember whenever I've kind of been real with my friends and talking about parties, I've been so surprised when I found out that other people also don't like big parties and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. And that was like a real kind of authentic being real moment with them.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I think it's exactly like that. And like, I think I was trying to sort of think about all the other facets of life where it feels like you're supposed to behave in a certain way, but you don't quite know what it is. And that kind of leads to sort of anxiety or discomfort or whatever. And so I was thinking that like until about the age of 14, I think you might agree with me on this because we've grown up in a similar sort of context. Until about the age of 14, I was under the impression that talking to adults was like a fundamentally different thing from talking to kids. I thought like when you're talking to adults, you're supposed to like behave in a different way. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know like what's appropriate when talking to adults. And so I think until about the age of 14, I probably never initiated a conversation with an adult unless there was some like obvious official business. However, when I was like 7 and under, I probably would have, just because like I was completely unaware of all of this stuff. I would just been like, oh, what's that on your shirt or whatever, just, yeah, how kids are, right? Did you have that?
Yeah, I think there's one specific example of a conversation I had with some random adult. I think I was like 9 or maybe 10. And it was when we were living in Devizes, and some random dude came over. It's like very, very, very distant. Like, our grandma's friends in Southend, like distant relatives to, that we didn't even know that well. And I just kind of sat next to this old man who, I have no idea what he did, but I just started chatting, and I was talking about, for example, like, the first house we moved into in England and how we had that dispute with the landlord. And like my mum commented, or rather Mimi commented afterwards that she was really surprised, and the guy was really surprised that, oh my God, who's this like really confident kid? And apparently he really enjoyed that conversation where I was telling him about the ins and outs of a landlord's job. But that's
wow.
that's the sort of conversation I almost would have never had with an adult at that age, but it's one that sticks out in my mind as being particularly enjoyable.
Yeah, I think the adults thing. I mean, why did you do that, by the way? Do you remember? What?
No, I can't quite remember the context. I can remember doing it, but I don't know. I guess something about him made me feel comfortable, I guess.
Right.
To just. But so on this point that you mentioned about what is it you said? You said when we're kids, we just kind of go. You'd just kind of go up to an adult and be like, "Hey, what's that on your shirt?"
Or
whatever.
Whatever.
This is sort of a conversational hack. It reminds me of, because I'm a big fan of all these hacks, and that is that when we are our most authentic selves and with our friends, we tend not to talk in questions. We tend to talk in statements. So, like, I would almost never ask you, "So, Taimur, how's it going?" or stuff like that. We'd be sitting in the car and we would be making statements at each other and just kind of bouncing off those.
Yeah.
And there are very, very few questions if you analyze the interactions between friends.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I started doing, as soon as I came across this, I was like, oh, sick. Okay, cool. And then when I was at work or something, or rather at school or at uni, and I'd have a thought come to my head, I would default to not saying it because it's not the kind of context where I would just share my thoughts randomly. But then I'd be like, no, I need to just say whatever comes to my mind. As long as it's not completely inappropriate, I'm just going to make the statement and throw it out there and do it in a way that just, I'm just making a statement as if I'm talking to someone that I'm very familiar with. And I found that worked really well. Oh, just like almost anything that would come to mind. So for example, at work today, I was sitting next to someone that I didn't know too well. And, I don't know, just if something came up, I would just be like, oh, right, yeah, so I've just had a patient who blah, 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 and just start talking as if, assuming familiarity with them.
Yeah,
and then they would kind of hop on that assuming familiarity thing as well. And we'd end up having a nice little interaction, even though we've never spoken before, just based off just a statement. And there's no, oh, so what's your name? Like the people that I'm having these chats with, I almost never know what their names actually are unless they're in my year group or whatever. But I found that to be a really good way of kind of connecting with people, just making a random statement.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think part of that is like, it's sort of keeping it real, right? Because when you meet someone new for the first time or whatever, if it feels like there's things you're supposed to say, like introduce yourself and go through all the rigmarole of that thing,
the script,
the sort of meeting a new person script, but you're sort of breaking from that, keeping it real, just sort of letting them enter, sharing your train of thought with them, and like letting them be a part of like your train of thought.
That's a good way of putting it. Sharing the train of thought. And actually, so one thing you said now is breaking away from the script, and this is something that I've been thinking about like in the last 2 weeks as well. The reason I was thinking about this is because we had a teaching session a couple of weeks ago where we were doing lumbar punctures, which is where you stick a needle into the spinal cord sort of and take some fluid out. And the clinical skills tutor asked for someone to volunteer, and obviously I volunteered because I make a point of volunteering for these things. And I was trying to be a bit funny. I was trying to play the crowd a bit, and I was lying on this examination couch, and she was like, she was pretending to be the doctor. She was like, oh, so hi there, Mr. Abdal. Would you mind if I call you Ali? And I was like, and I just kind of went over. I was like, yeah, that's fine. That's no problem at all. But then I thought that afterwards, I kind of wish I said, actually, I prefer Dr. Abdal. That would have been really funny. That would have absolutely killed, and that would have been a complete pattern interrupt.
Yeah,
and everyone would have therefore laughed because it's not what people are expecting.
Yeah,
and this is a concept that hypnotists actually use. It's part of hypnosis inductions, whereby, for example, you've probably seen in like Darren Brown shows or in street hypnotism, you would go to shake someone's hand, and then as they're about to shake yours, you would grab it with your other hand and then put your hand over their like forehead and say sleep or something like that. And supposedly the theory behind these, quote, rapid inductions is that when there's this pattern interrupt, people like don't know what to do, because the idea is that the brain is a predictive organ. It's trying to predict what's happening next to, efficiently make use of all the data around you. And so anytime something happens that's not in line with that prediction, there's this moment of, in a way, authenticity where you become your true unexposed self.
Yeah.
And at that point you become hyper suggestible, supposedly, and susceptible to suggestions like sleep. And that kind of this episode with this teaching thing got me thinking that perhaps this whole thing about connecting with people is about pattern interrupting and breaking away from the script of what they predict you're going to be saying.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think I think like you said, where in that sort of medical role playing thing that you did, that Ali's absolutely fine or whatever. That's a kind of it's basically a canned phrase, right? There's like, it's a canned phrase, and I think an alarming amount of our sort of interactions with other people are essentially through canned phrases. So last week I was in San Francisco, and I was meeting various people. I met a bunch of new people through friends and so on. And so I met maybe like 5 or 6 new people. So I was like of course I was like paying attention to like, how do I feel about this person, even though I've just like met them and so on. There was one person, one of the girls I met. She was like very,
hello.
Yeah, she was very polished. And one of the other sort of guys also sort of remarked on this, and we were kind of talking about this over dessert actually. They're like, everything she does is like extremely polished. Like, she'd sort of, when talking to you, she'd sort of like have a lot of sort of emotion in her voice, and she'd like make like an appropriate facial expression when talking to you, and so on. And like, it's hard. Do you understand what I mean by very polished?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Anytime I come across that, I always feel a little bit uneasy. Like if someone is very sort of exaggeratedly, like almost exaggeratedly enthusiastic about something that I'm saying, or asking the right question in like what's traditionally perceived to be like, oh my God, please tell me more about that.
Yeah, like the right intonation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like almost
rather than the kind of authentic tone that would be like, oh, cool, it's just like how you and I would talk, for example.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be like, oh, it wouldn't be as exaggerated.
Yeah, and so like she was just super, like everything she did was super polished. And we were kind of discussing this over dessert. I think part of the reason why that might have been was that she was like very new to the group. She'd sort of just met everyone as well, and so she didn't really know everyone that well, and so maybe that's it. But I think I suppose some people are just like that. But then that sort of got us talking about like how do you sort of know when someone's being real? And I think when someone's really polished, it's hard to tell whether the polish is just like them interacting with you through this veneer of politeness and civility and well-manneredness, where they're sort of interacting with you sort of through canned phrases and stuff. Like maybe you'll say, oh yeah, I saw this really good movie or something, and then they'll like ask some like classic questions about the movie and say, I'll add that to my list, and like, be like sort of enthusiastic. That kind of, it's sort of canned interactions. So I think when someone is really polished like that, it's hard to know, okay, are they just like, did they just go to finishing school, or are they interacting with me through this veneer of politeness right now? And something that someone else mentioned during this discussion was that he really likes it when someone new he meets expresses like a strong negative emotion for something, because I think in like polite society you're not supposed to be negative. Your default is supposed to be positive, and so generally whenever you're talking about anything, people are going to be generally positive about it. Oh, that film was like okay or whatever, or like yeah, it was fine, or it's more positive than that. But it's very rare that someone's like, oh man, I hate this thing, or yeah. And so
absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, so we were talking about how if you're looking for signal of authenticity, or like signal for keeping it real, if someone is strongly negative about something, it like feels a lot more real. It probably is a lot more real. And actually the guy who mentioned this, I know him quite well from my time out there last year. And one of the things that sort of struck me about him right from the start was that he'd often go off on these like rants about random little things that he'd hate. Like, oh my God, I hate the plastic straws, they're so hard to have to drink from, and like, he'd be just like have lots of random little things that apparently really annoyed him, and he'd like go on these rants. And I really liked that, because from the start that seemed really authentic. It felt like this was actually real. I was seeing his sort of authentic self. And actually, I think that could also be interpreted as like, oh, he's just a negative guy or whatever. But I really appreciated that about him.
Oh, that's interesting. So that kind of goes in line with, there are lots of studies that show supposedly that people bond more over negativity than over positivity. Like it's much easier to make a friend at work through a mutual hatred of a colleague rather than through anything specific that you have in common. And so perhaps that is some sort of reference to how these negative emotions make us feel that, oh, I'm seeing this side of someone that they wouldn't normally display to society.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I often in the process of meeting sort of a few of these new people, I often found myself responding in terms of like canned phrases and stuff. I don't know why.
So what do you mean by canned phrase? What's like a standard canned phrase that you would use?
What's a standard canned phrase that I'd use?
Okay, so I'll give you an example of canned phrases. So there's a very good book called Charisma on Command, which is now a YouTube channel that does very well. I read this back in like, I think it was either in first year or in like the final year of sixth form. And this is a pattern that's mentioned in lots of books about public speaking / charisma, which is that you want to break away from the canned responses when it comes to standard questions. So for example, when someone asks, how are you? the canned response is, yeah, not bad, you, or something equivalent. Whereas breaking away from that is something like, oh, absolutely freaking fantastic. And that, just automatically pattern interrupts people, and they're like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of cool. Or I suppose kind of going on your thing, if you were like so negative about it in like a funny way, that would also be interesting. And in these books, the kind of practical advice is that you should almost re-script your answers to questions like, what do you do and where are you from, such that they create enough hooks for other people to latch onto. Because what do you do? Like, no one really cares, oh, I'm a management consultant and I work 85 hours a week, because that just is quite boring. And one example he says in the book is, oh, I work in an office during the daytime, but what I really love to do is play the guitar, and I'm hoping one day to be a whatever. And just as a kind of quote lame example, it shows that, changing up the answers to these questions to what we think people want to hear, to what is more in line with their own interests and what they can then ask questions about, is a very easy, hacky way of becoming more charismatic.
Yeah, those are really nice hacks. I think, in general, just like you said, breaking the script and all of these things is just way better. But the thing, clearly everyone appreciates authenticity, and everyone appreciates it when other people are being real, and everyone prefers being real themselves than sort of interacting through this veneer of politeness and canned phrases and so on. So it's a win-win to keep it real. However, it's really hard to keep it real. Why is it so hard? It's so hard that when people are keeping it real, and when you do, on the rare occasion, see someone, really see someone, it's an amazing moment. Why is the default not keeping it real? That's what I want to know.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what you mean here by keeping it real. So by keeping it real, are you simply saying not trying to signal something? Because I mean, I've had a lot of conversations at work these past 2 weeks, and just kind of thinking back to the majority of them, they were pretty real. If some emergency medicine trainee sits next to me on the sofa in the mess, be like, "Yo, Liam, why'd you go for emergency medicine rather than anesthetics?" And he's kept it real. He answers the question reasonably. Kind of have a bit of a chat about that. I struggle to appreciate this concept that people are not keeping it real the majority of the time.
Ah, interesting. Okay. What kind of context do you think you don't keep it real? It sounds like you're at work, you're sort of pretty chill.
One context where I definitely don't keep it real is if I am, for example, talking to a consultant that I don't know very well. And then I'm definitely trying to signal.
Really?
Because the standard script of those conversations is that I'm the junior working with the consultant. There's just two of us on the ward round. We're going to be spending the next 3 hours together. There's going to be the same questions that come up. So, let's say we're walking down the 800 meter stretch of corridor in silence. At some point they're going to ask, so where are you going next year for placement? And then you'd be like, oh, I'm going to this hospital and I've got these placements. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. Have you thought about what you want to do next? And I was like, yeah, I was thinking about this. And it's just a very standard scripted conversation. But now, like today, I was having that chat with Mr. Hardwick, our consultant. And I was deliberately trying to go off script and, trying to mine him for advice in the same way that I would anyone else. Be like, oh, Mr. Hardwick, have you got any mates who are into anesthetics? And he was like, oh, well, yes, I suppose I do. There's quite a lot of consultants here who are into anesthetics. And then I asked if they seem to enjoy their lives and seem to enjoy their jobs. And he seemed to really come out of his shell a bit more.
Wait, what?
That conversation.
That seems like a really standard question. What was so unusual and authentic about that question and answer?
It's not very standard.
Oh,
to ask it's not standard to ask your consultant if they've got mates in other specialties.
Oh, right.
It's just it's more. I mean, it's not that not standard. It's just not the sort. It's just not a default conversation that you would have.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah, but he seemed to appreciate having his opinion mined on that front. And I was trying my best to talk to him as if he was not a consultant, because that's a big part of medicine that I really don't like, the whole hierarchical nature of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about why I feel like the default is actually not keeping it real.
I feel like in something like, for example, a networking event, the default would be not keeping it real. But then I've also not been to that many networking events, so maybe it's easy for us to stereotype, oh, the sorts of people that go to networking events are the sorts of people that want to signal about A, B, C, D, and E. Whereas I feel like, in most interactions I have at work and in real life, I'm kind of keeping it real most of the time.
What about in interactions where, like buying a coffee from a cafe or something? It's like, do you sort of do that on autopilot with canned phrases and responses? Or do you feel like you're sort of seeing the other person truly? And
I do it on autopilot for the most part, but every time I do, while I'm sitting there waiting for the coffee, I think in my head, oh damn, I wish I'd gone off script for that.
Yeah.
There was a moment at work actually today. So there's a switchboard at the hospital. So if you dial the number 100, you get through to the main hospital switchboard, and then the idea is that you'll ask them to put you through to someone, and whatever, they then put you through to that person. So the standard way of introducing yourself in a conversation, which is a new initiative, well, it's not that new, is hello, my name is. It's like what's written on everyone's lanyards, because there was this big campaign that was led by some patient or someone about this idea that doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals will go to see a patient and just not really get around to introducing themselves, where it's actually such a big part of it. Anyway, that's kind of the context of this. So for example, I would call up switchboard and be like, "Hi, my name's Ali. I'm the upper GI surgical F1," and then I'd take a breath. "Could I please speak to the respiratory registrar on call?"
Right.
And then today, I made a point to have more of a gap in that. Be like, "Hi, my name's Ali. I'm the upper GI F1," and then wait for them to say something. And every single time they broke the silence with like, "Oh, hi, Ali," or something like that. And one of them was even like, "Hey, Ali, how's it going?" And I was like, "Oh, it's going great. Thanks for asking. How are you?" And we had this seeming what felt real in that context, where I mean, like, "Hello, how's it going?" and "Fine, thanks, you." It's not that real in most cases in life, but it goes completely off script when you're calling up switchboard.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I love it.
and that made me feel really good inside. So.
Look, I feel like I was onto something profound here, and I feel like
you were on the verge of something profound, but the fact that I've said that actually people are real most of the time,
that's kind of thrown it.
Breaks.
But no. Okay, basically, I don't believe people are real most of the time. However, I haven't figured out why I think that, or like the right way to articulate that. However, I sort of started reading a very interesting book last week, which I'd like to make some more headway into. It's called "What You Say After You Say Hello" or something. Have you heard of this book?
Oh, no, I haven't, but this sounds interesting.
I think it's written by some psychiatrist or psychotherapist or something. And I'm only like 10% of the way through, and at the start it was saying, I think it's called "What You Say After You Say Hello." And in the start, it was talking about something like, how like when we sort of interact with someone else, for the most part, we're kind of, our minds are sort of muddied up with like our own random thoughts and feelings, and like, look, I can't articulate this.
Okay, perhaps in a future episode of the podcast, when you've made more headway with this book,
I'll make more headway.
You'll be able to articulate. Yeah. Okay, so let's do the classic thing that you're taught in medical school in communication skills, which is when you're not sure what to say, you just summarize and screen. So to summarize what we've talked about, it sounded like we've talked a little bit about this idea of authenticity being the thing that we are craving, and also in all of our social interactions, and yet, kind of the under thread of this is, why does it feel so novel when we do get authenticity, given that we all crave it, and that it's in all of our best interests to be our fully authentic selves. And we talked a little bit about signaling, and how in most supposedly in what you were saying is that in most realms of life there is some element of signaling to people that you're talking to, especially when it comes to kids between the ages of 7 and 14. Although I don't know, I was definitely signaling a lot before the age of 7.
I want to stop you there. I think there's two things that kind of stop people from keeping it real. I think the first is definitely signaling, and that's a big one, about like wanting to come across a certain way. I think the other one is the thing I was saying about this idea that you're supposed to behave in a certain way. So for example, in an investor meeting, you're supposed to like do, I don't know, God knows what, or like when you're on a date with someone, you're supposed to like do
that's
whatever.
true. Yeah.
So I think it's like these supposed tos that are quite pervasive. And, you know, when I was younger, I thought when you're talking to adults, you're supposed to, I don't know, do something, but I wasn't sure what. And so I think the supposed to is just as big a thing as the signaling thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can get on board with that. I think that's a big part of why we feel inauthentic, or why we feel others are inauthentic. And it's all, I suppose the main thing we've come to is that it's all about pattern interrupting, breaking away from the script of what you're supposed to do, what the other person just subconsciously predicts that you're going to say. And those are when we get our true kind of, it comes a little bit closer to being real. And I quite liked your point about expressing very strong negative emotions, almost like a David Mitchell rant, just about something completely random. Might be an interesting tactic to try.
I don't like your hack approach to this. I think it's still not keeping it real. It might be like the hack of like having a different set of canned phrases that break the script. You know, I don't think that's keeping it real.
Okay, fine. I would agree with that. I'm not saying the hacks are everything. What I'm saying is that the hacks are a very useful, practical way to dip your toes into the ideal of keeping it real at all times. Because ideally, if we were all keeping it real at all times, there would be some element of, and this was something else I wanted to bring up. You know, this like radical honesty movement, where you just say every single thing that comes into your head without a filter at all. That is keeping it real taken to the extreme. And yet, anyone who's tried this and written about it says that it's not a nice experience to go through, because society functions because of some level of the veneer of politeness. Like, you know, if you see a very fat person, you wouldn't just comment, "Wow, I think you're really fat," for example.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, no, sure. So, you know, your thing of keeping it real, I think, needs more definition, because like when does keeping it real become this idea of radical honesty where you're just being a dick, and when does keeping it real become so clearly, you know, creating different canned responses to your canned responses is not quite keeping it real, but it comes one step closer to keeping it real, to the point where you get comfortable with, quote, being your authentic self. Although again, I take slight issue with the fact that we haven't quite defined this properly, because what does it mean to be an authentic self? Do you mean you just say whatever comes to your mind? And so partly the reason why I think these hacks are good is because even if we don't actually achieve that internal state of being our authentic selves, we can give other people the experience that we are being our authentic selves, and they will come away from that interaction thinking, you know, feeling value, feeling like their day is a little bit better because they've had an authentic interaction. And the nice thing about the hacks is that this is an easy way of going about doing that. And over time, you become more authentic and you start incorporating these into your life. But even then, like, you know, just the very fact that you have identified that this thing of people bond more through negative emotions and then are more likely to bias your own conversations towards negative emotions means that you aren't keeping it real. You know, the very fact that we're having this conversation and overthinking about these social interactions a bit certainly means that in the interactions that you and I are having, we're not keeping it real, because we have this script, we have this analysis running through our heads about, okay, I wonder how this relates with podcast episode number 7. Like, where does this keeping it a real thing actually, like, it seems like such an undefined phrase to the point where it's almost useless.
Yeah, it's a really nebulous concept. I totally agree. I think one other sphere in which I'm finding it hard to keep it real, or even know when I am keeping it real these days, is Twitter. Because every time I think of, and I think I tweeted about this about a week ago or something, every time I have some thought which I think is interesting or insightful or whatever, and I think about tweeting it, then I think, why do I want to tweet this? Am I trying to sound smart on Twitter, or am I keeping it real and sort of just thinking in public, thinking out loud kind of thing, you know? And so when I think of something sort of smart, or something I think is smart or interesting or insightful, I start to think about that. And then I think, oh man, I definitely don't want to trying to sound smart on Twitter, you know? That I don't want to do that. But then I think, okay, the other random things that pop into my head are like, Like today, I was listening to Despacito for the first time in about a year, and I was thinking, man, this is really good. And I thought, oh man, maybe I should tweet that, wow, Despacito is actually still a tune, you know?
That would be a pretty good tweet.
And then I thought, that's not interesting. No one cares about this. So, like, you got to draw the line somewhere, right? And so,
yeah, I think Twitter is interesting because it's naturally performative. I think the only real circumstance in which you can truly be real is in a private journal that you know no one else is going to read, because that is when you're really keeping it real. But the very fact that you're putting your thoughts online, like you and I aren't really keeping it real in any of our podcast episodes, because there's probably stuff that we're thinking or doing that is non-politically correct that we don't want to share with the wider world. Whereas if you and I were just having a conversation in the car where no one else was listening, we'd be keeping it more real.
oh
Equally,
yeah,
the sorts of things I would write in my journal. Maybe I wouldn't even say to you. Actually, I probably would, because I don't have that many secrets. But anytime something comes out into the world, especially to people that we don't know extremely well, we're by definition not going to, we aren't going to be keeping it real. So I don't think I think when people say, so you sent me this Twitter account, I don't know who it was, we'll link it in the show notes, and you were like, oh man, this person's amazing because they keep it real and have an authentic insight at the same time, or something along those lines. But that person probably crafts their whole persona to make it seem as if they're keeping it real. And therefore, again, this idea of keeping it real becomes a nebulous concept that doesn't
yeah, it really needs a definition, because yeah, there's definitely like different ways of keeping it real and different levels of keeping it real that are appropriate in different contexts. But I think there's
And so when it comes to things like keeping it real that have no definitions that we know of so far, then maybe the way forward is to think about the what's it called, the phenotype, the way that the trait is expressed. So things like vulnerability, things like pattern interrupts, things like expressing strong negative emotions. You would count all of these as, quote, hacks and therefore look down on them. But I would say that actually this is the manifestation of this underlying genotype of keeping it real that we can't see into anyway. That sounded profound, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like what I'm trying to get at here, Ali, is a very deep and profound concept of truly seeing another human being, and you're painting over it with your hacks. All right, and I don't like that.
Okay, well, maybe if you were to define your concept of seeing another human being in less nebulous terms, I wouldn't need to paint over it with my hacks to try and give this conversation any substance at all. Taimur.
All right, look, that's not unreasonable. I'll definitely try and do that.
Okay.
I feel like this book will help.
We've talked for a very long time. Let's solicit feedback and advice from our listeners as usual. Please send us an email to hi@notoverthinking.com if you have any thoughts about what it means to keep it real. I think we've been saying this all along, but I think at this point we definitely should discuss some of the responses that we get in the next podcast, because I don't know. I don't have a definition of keeping it real. Neither do you, clearly. You've made that abundantly clear in this episode. So it'll be really good to get someone more intelligent and who thinks about this more, maybe to drop us a line and give us some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
I think that's reasonable. We'll draw the conversation to a close, and I suppose ending with the hacks. We've talked about things like vulnerability, things like breaking the pattern, perhaps even creating new canned responses to questions like how are you and what do you do and where are you from and stuff like that. Do you have an interesting insight of the week to share?
Do I have an interesting insight of the week? Why don't you go first?
So I've got a funny thing this week that sort of ties in what you said. I think maybe it was 2 episodes ago, about things that are such niche jokes that they become like 10 times funnier just because they're so niche. And there's one that's just had me cracking up almost every day for the last 2 weeks. So there is a junior doctor that I work with who has also read a little bit and seen some like YouTube videos about stuff like how to talk to people, how to make a girl like you, how to get girls, and that general sphere of stuff that teenage boys tend to search when they're in their teens,
another legend,
or early 20s or mid 20s as the case may be. Anyway, so that fellow legend and I were chatting about this, and we realized that we both had this shared interest, and then we had like a great conversation about this, and kind of there's a YouTube channel or like a movement called Real Social Dynamics. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've heard of
RSD
this.
for
Yeah,
short.
yeah.
Yeah, and their like spokespeople are like RSD Julian and RSD Bob, and that's their like
This rings a bell.
prefix.
I can't remember where.
Yeah.
But this rings a bell.
and they make videos and YouTube videos and stuff about how to get a girl to like you and how to appropriately respond to text messages and that sphere of content. Anyway, so that's kind of the first piece of context around this niche joke.
All right.
The second piece of context around this niche joke is within the medical sphere, you always tend to form like a WhatsApp group with your team in it, or you get your, like, for example, you would get your consultants' phone numbers such that when they're at home on the weekend and on call, you can message them with questions about certain patients. So you'd be like, lady in bed 18, the CRP is 247, the white cells are 18. I've discussed with the micro, I think we should switch that comoxiclef to tazocin. The CT has been protocoled. We're waiting for the CT scan, blah, blah, blah. So the point I'm making is you would send them a really, really, really long message.
Oh, okay, right.
And the response that would come back is, for example, meet in M4 in 2 minutes. Okay. And that's just a standard pattern. And so this other junior doctor, and I was on my phone and messaging one of our consultants this thing, and he replied with something really, really, really short. And this friend just commented saying, "That's RSD Rob right there." And the amount of context you need to appreciate that joke of this is how the RSD guys tell you to respond to texts with girls, that they send you a long ass paragraph long message and you reply with one liner. So now we sort of been screenshotting these chats that we've had with the consultants back and forth, being like, "Oh, that's RSD Sugendran, that's RSD Hardwick."
That's amazing.
Because
that's really
because these like 40-year-old consultants reply with like these short, snappy things. And I found that even like when walking from one end of the hospital to another, if this even just enters my mind, I just start laughing for no reason. And I look around to make sure no one can see me laughing. And then I think, oh, hang on. It's not a bad thing if people see me laughing to myself. That's fine. Spreading positivity is a good thing. So that was my funny thing of the week.
That's hilarious. It sounds a bit like how at university you'll sort of send an email to a professor or a lecturer or something, and you'll send this like long ass email that you've really put a lot of thought into. You've like tweaked the wording like 5 different times, and they'll reply with like, "Okay, sent from my iPhone."
Yeah, no, it's exactly like that.
Wait, just out of curiosity, how did you get to this level with this guy where you're talking about both having watched these Real Social Dynamics videos? How long did that take? It took a couple of weeks. It started off that he was sharing something about his new girlfriend or something like that, and I just casually I was being my vulnerable self and I was like, "Oh, have you got any tips?" And he was like, "Oh, well, actually, there's a few different things that I've heard about," and I was like, "Wait a minute, this sounds very familiar." And then you came out to each other.
Exactly, yeah. Then we realized we're a fellow. We have a shared interest in RSD.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good note to end on.
Yes, I'm sure. Right, so thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please send us feedback at hi@overthinking.com. Send us your thoughts, and please do leave us a review on the iTunes store. If you have an iOS device of any description, it really helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
That was really frustrating because I genuinely feel like there's something there. And I feel like, okay, I agree it's really hard to define, but I think, okay, and defining it, I agree is important. But do you agree that there's a very particular feeling associated, I think, with truly seeing another person and them truly seeing you, I think that is actually something legit.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something legit.
And I think it's rare. You don't see everyone. Like, fine, you might be keeping it real when you're hanging out with your mates at the hospital or whatever, but you're not.
But you aren't keeping it real when you're talking to the barista and Costa. I mean, you aren't really expected to keep it real in this.
Yeah.
I mean, like, in a way, what's the point? It's a transactional exchange of goods and services.
No, I'm not. Okay, fine. I'm not.
You've all got things to do.
Advocating that you have to do that. But for example, you said that at the hospital or whatever, like in most of your interactions, you're keeping it real.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you would agree that there is another level of like keeping it real that feels very different, and that feels like this very special thing that we're talking about like truly seeing someone or them truly seeing you. that's
I mean, I think that level of keeping it real. So for example, I felt like this chat that I was having with this other F1 was more in the realm of keeping it real, and it felt like a genuine connection because it's the sort of topic that people wouldn't talk about.
Oh, mate, it's like the secret obsessions thing that I wrote a blog post on.
Yeah,
like 6 weeks ago or something.
Yeah.
Whereas,
why did you choose this specialty over another? Yeah, you're keeping it real, but you're not showing any vulnerability in revealing that information.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be some element of vulnerability in the keeping it real discussion, because if people aren't showing any vulnerability, they're just going to be subtext signaling. At least that's going to come across. That's how it's going to come across to you.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna read this book. I'm gonna finish this damn book. I think it's gonna have all the answers.
And I think when people like for example, when people share their personal anxieties or their personal thoughts and feelings about things that they find difficult, that is also another realm of keeping it real, where people tend to feel that, oh my God, I feel like we had a connection. I feel like they were being fully real in that moment, and that again comes back to vulnerability, which is why I mentioned that at the start, because I thought that was more of a crux on which to hang your theory of authenticity on than whatever it was that you defined it as.
No. Okay, look, I get the vulnerability. Oh, man. Okay, so look, I agree that you can sort of actively try and be vulnerable with people. You can like actively tell them about your insecurities and stuff like that. And yes, you will be keeping it real because you are actually doing those things. But I feel like there's two kind of ways of being. One way of being is in which you are truly keeping it real with everyone you interact with. And the other way of being is the way that the rest of us are, where we're not doing that. And we're like, and we have to use these hacks and stuff. And I actually don't think the hacks get you over this chasm. The hacks will get you, the hacks will like make you have better interactions and stuff. And I'm all about that. But I don't think the hacks will get you over this chasm. I think to get over the chasm, there's something deeper and profound that has to change within like the way you see the world and the way you see other people. Something like that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, and I think there is something there. But then I think back to my own interactions, and I feel like I do, as I said, keep it real the majority of the time. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a different sort of keeping it real too. For example, if you're with your 3 mates and you're smoking weed at 4 o'clock in the morning and you've been just chatting for the last 6 hours, that's like a different sort of keeping it real. And most people would say that those chats are, quote, good because they are more authentic or whatever. And you see people's true authentic selves when you're chilling late into the night. And when we were at university, you and I were both fans of these late night chills because like the party or the ball or whatever is fine. But it's the post chill that actually is where the real magic happens, because people's barriers are down and they're kind of being more being their authentic selves. I don't know. I think a lot of it is context dependent. Like if you were at a party that was very loud, you probably wouldn't be your authentic self to the extent that you would 8 hours later in the post chill, where the energy is a little bit low. You're less kind of high energy. You're less trying to share a story that makes people laugh, or that perhaps. And yet, when I've been in those circumstances at parties and been the one trying to, for example, hold court, I wouldn't say that I'm not keeping it real. I'd say that I'm trying to keep it real, but in a different, slightly more performative fashion, because that's what the context calls for.
Right.
And that in the moment is what people appreciate, rather than me, for example, like my default tone of voice is kind of something like this, where I'd be talking at this pitch, mumbling a bit. The people who know me very well would be able to understand what I'm saying. But yet this isn't the sort of volume and tone that I'd be talking at if I were trying to keep it real in like a YouTube video or in a podcast or even at a party. It's very much reserved for these post-chill circumstances. And so like a lot of it is context dependent. And therefore my thing is that it all comes back to what does keeping it real actually mean?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, it does come back to that. Fine.
Anyway, right. Cool. See you later.